Talk, and we're just a little bit late. We were working on the technical aspects of this live show, but really glad you could make it, and really excited to have my guest here, Dave Singh, who's a top attorney, estate planning, asset protection. You're joining Wealth Protector TV, and the whole idea behind this channel is to get value out to you. There's a lot going on. The winds of change are howling when it comes to estate and asset protection planning. And so we wanted to make sure and jump on this and get you out some education. Also, you'll see on the screen there, you can text guard assets to that phone number. If you have any questions as we're talking about the subject matter here, and you want to get with Dave one-on-one for a complimentary strategy session about your own planning, or maybe you're working with clients, you're an advisor, and you're involved in asset protection, estate planning, you're working with property owners, business owners, whatever the case is, text guard assets to that phone number, and you'll get access to a one-on-one complimentary session with Dave. So Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's just jump right into this because this is a huge deal. And we're talking about what's going on right now in the world of estate and asset protection planning. And maybe you can just start by giving us an overview, and let's jump into some hot topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few things going on. This is what we would consider an exciting time in our field. This is as exciting as it gets. It's not so exciting for our clients because there's a lot of scary things, potentially scary things that are happening. The big thing that I think everyone is aware of, kind of thinking about, is the potential reduction in the estate tax exemption. And so that's where, we currently have $23.4 million to play within, when we're planning for married couples. We have $23.4 million of assets that we can leave without triggering an estate tax. And then that's 11.7 million for individual. We're looking at, a potential reduction of that exemption down to potentially 3.5 million per person. Maybe, we haven't really landed on what that could be, but that's part of what's in discussion. That's actually pre-Obama levels, the beginning of Obama's term, actually. So that was, that's what that means for our clients is, if we don't do something this year, and we would have a taxable estate currently, and we don't do something this year, then we're going to have a lot more that's subject to estate tax potentially next year, should something happen to our clients. Now, if we're in that in-between range, so we don't currently have a taxable estate, but if the estate tax exemption goes down next year, then we would have a taxable estate. That's the tricky part, and that's where clients are, less certain about taking certain actions, because we don't know where things are going to land. We don't know when they're going to take effect, or where, whether they would immediately take effect, at the beginning of next year, like we're thinking, or if there would be some period, some kind of grace period to kind of do some planning. That middle ground is where we're meeting a lot of clients. They're not currently taxable, but if the estate tax exemption does go down, then they certainly would have a taxable estate. We're going to have a lot more clients that are going to fall into that category. We're meeting with a lot of clients that are in that territory right now. And so the analysis really has to be, what would the impact be of not doing anything this year? And what would the impact be of doing something? Because in this world, the estate and asset protection world, I compare it to, that whack-a-mole game, right? That we used to play in the arcade. And
love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you hit one thing down, we hit estate taxes. For example, in California, you hit estate taxes down. We have to be mindful of a property tax issue popping up. We have to look at capital gains tax, step up basis as well. These are things that one can potentially impact the other depending on how we move. And so we want to be mindful of that. That has to be part of every analysis. and what I just touched on as well is kind of the two other areas that are on our clients' minds. In California here, we have Prop 19, which is in effect now, and previously pre-Prop 19, many of the moves that we would be able to take to reduce the estate would not necessarily have such an impact on a property tax perspective. But now many of those moves will potentially have an impact, and so we have to plan for that very carefully. Make sure that we are comfortable with that, gopher or mole or whatever, popping up and kind of dealing with that. Um, those are the two big issues: estate taxes and property taxes. Now, the
Well,
others,
Dave, let me ask you a quick question. So, how
absolutely.
do you get into that with somebody because you don't know what's coming down the pike with those changes?
Hmm.
So, do you have like what's that review look like? Are you kind of setting the stage for things, or are there immediate action items people are doing?
It's interesting because for the most part, these are questions that are being, or these are conversations that are actually being initiated by clients. So they'll hear something in the news, they may read it, in the newspaper or something, they some through some medium, could be a conversation that they're having with their friends, right? Well,
Yeah,
while they're out, playing golf on the weekend or something. And so through some medium, they are getting information, not always accurate information, but they are getting some information that's enough to trigger a concern, and then they're initiating these conversations. We're certainly doing a lot of outreach. You and I and the rest of the firm are certainly
right.
uh, doing a lot of outreach around this, because it's important that clients that need to take action actually do something this year. Um, but beyond that, I think there's probably just as many clients that are initiating conversations with us and asking, what's going on here, what should we be doing now, if anything. And those are important questions to ask. Those are the questions to ask, I would say, is to really get the ball rolling and run through that analysis and to make a determination of you know you need to take action right now, you don't need to take action, or you're somewhere in between, which is where a lot of folks are, right in
Yeah,
between.
well, yeah, and it's funny because you said, well, people are hearing about things everywhere. It reminded me of a quote from W.C. Fields, who said, the stock market is overvalued if you're getting investment tips from your taxi cab driver and your barber.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And
I,
yeah.
I think the estate planning and asset protection is the same way. There's so
Mhm.
much information floating around right now, and it sounds like to me, one of the things you say is knowledge is key. Is just understand what really is going on and how it might impact you. I mean, is that a fair way to couch it?
Absolutely. And I would say I would go one step further. So knowledge is key. I think that's the foundation, for sure. We want to, and when we're meeting with clients, I think the primary objective is not to, immediately jump into doing work for clients. The primary objective is to educate clients. This is the framework. These are the parameters that we're kind of working within. And now that we have an understanding, a mutual understanding, we're all speaking the same language, the clients as well. Now that we have that educational component, that knowledge base built in, now we need to collectively go through an analysis. We need to run scenarios. We need to run numbers and see whether you would be impacted, and if you would be impacted, what are you comfortable with that impact? Is that something that you could bear, or is it something that you want to eliminate? And that's where it gets really, I won't use the word technical, because I don't think that's it. I think it gets really nuanced, and every client that we meet with has a different set of preferences around risk, uncertainty, their tolerance for increased administrative costs, things like that. I think can certainly move the conversation in one direction or another. um, you have clients on one end of the spectrum that have just an complete allergic reaction to paying taxes, right? And so,
Right,
and then you have clients on the other end that say, look, it's taxes.
right.
We've built it into our lives and our business model, and we're fine with it. but thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing it to our attention. So,
Right,
you
right.
know,
And there seems to be sort of a misconception out there that estate planning is for the Warren Buffetts and the Bill
yeah.
Gates of the world. Can you address that a little bit? Because I still see so many people who don't have any estate planning in place
Hmm.
and they end up getting hurt. So, who is estate planning for?
Hmm. It's one of those things that I would say, I've been practicing over 10 years and it hasn't changed. It's no one thing is the word estate planning is misleading because it's planning for an estate, and the thought of having an estate is not something that say everyday folks would think of themselves as having an estate. But at the same time, we have a house, we have a car, we have a bank account, and what many people don't realize as they're thinking through is that is your estate, and we are planning for that estate. So it doesn't estate by itself does not communicate or should not communicate super high net worth billionaires and uh, that type of person, but it does. We just know that it does in our society. And so the way that we think about it, the way that we try to communicate it is it's really about there's going to be something that happens after, right? We have stuff that we've acquired during our lives, and when we're no longer around, there's going to be something that happens after, and you have a choice of what happens after. You have a choice of what that process looks like. You can do nothing, and essentially what you're saying is if I do nothing, I'm okay with the court supervising the process. I handle a lot of probates, as you know,
Yeah.
and the probate process is it's often sold. Yeah, I don't speak about it this way, but it's often sold as really this really really complicated thing that you need an attorney for. It's not that necessarily. It can be a nightmare, but it doesn't have to be. It's just something that needs to be managed, right? And so that's the
Right.
court supervised process. So we have clients that they may choose to do nothing, or they may just not know. They may have never been advised, and I think probates will continue for some time. Uh, maybe as for the foreseeable future, because it's kind of like that the same concept as trying to get people to quit smoking. There will always be some percentage of the population that will smoke, right? And so it's kind of the same concept here, that in reverse. But essentially that's what we're doing with clients who are choosing not to plan or don't have the opportunity. They're just saying, look, whatever the court decides, or I'm subjecting myself to the court process, and I know things will ultimately go to my family. They may not get there exactly the same, the way that I had hoped, but they'll ultimately receive what they're entitled to, and the court's going to, kind of supervise that process. Now, that I didn't mention anything about the values of the estates at all there.
Right.
And
Right.
really that's the distinction, is you're just choosing how you want your estate to be handled, how you want your stuff to be handled when you're no longer around. And so the trust process and forming a trust, that could be any number of the trusts. And as you know, we have many, many different types of trusts that we can utilize for clients. But let's talk about kind of the foundational trust, which is a revocable living trust.
Yeah.
What we're doing there is we're essentially creating a vehicle that for our clients, and they're the creators of that vehicle. They're going to take their most important assets, and they're going to put them into the trunk of that vehicle, and essentially they'll be in the driver's seat. They'll be the trustees of that vehicle during their lifetime. We'll have some backup drivers in the passenger seat. Those are the backup trustees. And then we'll have the typically kids, but could be charities. Who are we trying to take care of? We'll have them in the back seat. We'll call them beneficiaries. That's essentially the foundation of every trust, and that's how I explain it to clients. And by creating that vehicle, what we're doing is we are allowing ourselves to follow a different roadmap, and that's what we create for our clients, is a roadmap that goes inside that vehicle, and anyone that's in the driver's seat, they're legally obligated to follow that roadmap. So that roadmap is not going to say drive into the courthouse and subject yourself to that process. In fact, it's going to allow you to drive past the courthouse and handle things privately. So, so just from that perspective, I think there's a lot of value to to planning ahead of time if there's an opportunity to do so. Not everyone has that ability
Right. Right.
or that opportunity, but if a family does have the opportunity to plan ahead, you can easily, very easily, I mean, any estate planning attorney who calls themselves an estate planning attorney, if they can avoid probate for you, I don't know what they're, that's kind of the base level of competence
Right.
in our field. But, there's so many other things that we do once we get going in terms of planning, but that's kind of the base level. So going back to your question, about estate planning is only for the Warren Buffetts and things like that. I really try to, when I'm speaking with clients, try to reframe that question that, Warren Buffett's, something's going to happen when he passes away, just like everyone else. They're going to pass away. They got some stuff and something's going to happen to it. Now, planning is really about how do we want that process to flow? How do we want that administration to happen?
When you're talking to somebody and they do have a taxable estate, meaning they are going to be subject, especially if these new changes come down the road, more and more people will be subject to, transfer tax or other issues. What are the things you look at to help people? I mean, is it trust design? Are there more, sophisticated tools that you're using to get assets from parents to kids and so forth?
Yeah, it's increasingly tricky, here in California because of the property tax component. It's kind of this thorn in the side of much of the planning that we would typically do in situations where we have taxable estates. Now we may still proceed with some of that planning, but now there's now there's a cost to that was not present previously. And so what we're looking for, certainly we're looking for, if there's real estate involved, that is an entire category of planning. Um, we're always thinking about asset protection, and often planning for asset protection and planning for estate tax reduction or minimization. Those two often run together. Not always, but very often they run in parallel. And so there are techniques that we would look at that and often employ that will serve dual purposes. And so that is nice when we have that opportunity. We would look at things like existing business entities. So we'll look at existing, holdings in terms of real estate, other holdings, certainly business interests. But we'll also look at what types of business entities clients have set up. Those are themselves vehicles for a lot of the planning that we do
Hmm.
on the estate tax front. And so, or do we need to create entities? Do we need to sometimes do we need to deconstruct certain entities because we have too many assets in the same entity? We see that all the time as well.
Oh,
And so those are some of the, I would say, kind of the triggering things that we will look for that will trigger a certain type of planning. But really, I think as a kind of a broad stroke is, what is the client's estimate of their estate's value? We like to understand that because it's interesting. For the most part, clients will they will end up being fairly accurate, even with real estate. It's something that they're monitoring, the values of over
yeah.
time, or they may have gotten, recent appraisals for a financing situation or things like that. And so understanding where the client's head is at in terms of how do I view my own estate, what is the value that I think it's worth, because part of our analysis is determining how the IRS would look at the value of the estate,
Hmm.
and there could be potentially a big difference between those two. and then some of the planning that we might have in mind may not be necessary, or may not be necessary right now. Um, another thing that we'll look at, which it just triggered a thought for me, is the trajectory of the client. And so we may have clients that are uh, moving out of their working lives or their business building, and so their estate is essentially, the value of the estate is relatively stable, and it's going to stay in a certain territory or a certain tier for the foreseeable future, for the rest of their lives. And then we have clients that are rapidly accumulating assets, and then those assets themselves could appreciate highly over the course of their lifetimes. And so that's a
Like
different.
a business or property or something you're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or we have, clients that have ownership in startups, or younger companies, and you could see, you know, essentially exponential growth on some of those holdings, and so we're looking for that as well, because there are significant tax planning opportunities that we would want to implement for those clients sooner than later. Otherwise, they're not just going to have a taxable estate. They might have income tax or capital gains issues down the line as well. So we have to be mindful of all the different taxes, the different tax frameworks as we're going through. Yeah.
When somebody, this issue comes up a lot. Uh, when somebody goes through a divorce, husband and wife get divorced, and there's assets there. Is it just mandatory every time they got to redo the estate plan? And when do you do that? Right after the divorce is final, or things you can do during the divorce? Like what's going on there? Yeah.
Excellent question. And yeah, we obviously encounter it about 50% of the time, right? They say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
we encounter it fairly often. Obviously, not not that high of a percentage, but in any case, there is a and I'm not a family law attorney. I'll just kind of caveat that, but there is a period once a divorce is started. There's a period, that a restraining order that applies during the period of the divorce proceeding, where things can't be changed by either spouse. So some of the things, and this is to my understanding, some of the things that cannot be changed, are beneficiaries on life insurance policies, health insurance, and estate planning is part of that. You can't change distributions, and you can't modify the estate plan, essentially. So we're kind of in this like limbo period during the period of divorce. This is while the case is proceeding, where it's kind of like everyone pushed pause right at the start of the divorce proceeding, and no one can move until it's over. And then at that point, the court will actually order that assets be distributed in a certain way, and the clients are bound by the court order, or the divorcing spouses are bound by the court order to execute that within a certain period of time. That's typically what we'll see. There's some settlement agreement that is ultimately agreed to by the parties, and part of the terms of that is, or one of the terms of that is, that they have to implement what the court orders within a certain period of time afterward.
Okay.
So, certainly that would involve, or that would include, I would imagine, unwinding a joint trust that, a married couple had created together. And those might spin out into individual trusts, but they may not either. It just depends on what the court is ordering in terms of the underlying properties, or the underlying assets.
Yeah, it seems like that's a big deal today, obviously, because there is divorce, but also with the new pending, laws coming through, people who are newly divorced or getting divorced, their financial situation is changing. And so they may hit certain levels where they wouldn't have as a married couple. That's why that was coming into my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think these are important conversations for anyone. Whenever there's a life event, this is when you want to have these conversations with your advisors, and it's not just attorneys, it's your tax advisors, financial professionals as well. So it's it's important to bring the team up to speed. The challenge with married couples is that sometimes that team has worked with the couple, so there are in our world we would be conflicted out potentially from advising any one party,
Right.
on things like that. But the idea is to consult with professional advisors well in advance of the point where action will have to be taken, so that when that action is taken, it's deliberate and it's expected. There's nothing surprising about it.
Right.
That we get a lot of questions about actions that have already been taken, and that's really tough.
I mean, in a divorce?
No, no, and so out just generally,
Oh,
just generally from clients, what I've found is a lot of times we'll have a question or an email come through, and some action has been taken already, and was this correct? The question is, was this correct? And
oh,
can and that's tough to deal with. So I think as a general principle, any life event, any kind of major transaction, I can't think of an instance where it's not going to be better to be proactive or ahead of it, than to be responsive or reactive, or kind of initiate that conversation after the fact, right? And so
right.
I think that's kind of if there's any takeaway, it's get the right people involved sooner than later, or
Yeah.
earlier the
Yeah.
better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Dave, it's always great information, having these updates with you. I know there's a lot going on, and you and I are going to keep talking and bringing information out to people who are listening. I just want to say thanks, anybody and everybody, for showing up here. Dave, thanks for coming on, and look forward to continuing the discussion with you.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see you, everybody.